Babes, welcome back. We love you, we see you, and we are so glad you're here. But I need you to pull up a chair, grab your glass, and literally brace yourself
Right.
because my blood pressure is legitimately in the stratosphere today.
Oh, absolutely. Like, we need everyone fully seated for this one.
Truly. I want you to imagine this scenario for a second.
Yeah.
You are thrust into a dating pool, right? But your algorithm isn't like Bumble or Hinge. Your algorithm is strictly controlled by your evil, Machiavellian, former therapist stepmother.
A literal nightmare.
Right. And your top match,
Yeah.
a literal crypto bro with a pre-existing restraining order who looks you dead in the eye and implies he wants to break you like a horse. Babes, welcome to the dystopian dating pool of Gilead.
It is truly the most harrowing reality dating show ever conceived. Like, it's giving The Bachelor, but the final rose is just, it's just a lifetime of systemic subjugation and profound psychological trauma.
Oh, completely.
The stakes aren't, a sponsored influencer deal. The stakes are your actual physical survival.
Exactly. I have been, vibrating with anxiety since the credits rolled on episode 7, Commitment. But before we dive straight into this absolute chaos, I have to do a quick drink check.
Please, because we need it.
The strawberry puree spiked wine is on deck. I spent an ungodly amount of time blending strawberries for this concoction, and let me tell you, babes, it might not be holy, but it's good. So we're fine.
It is dangerously good. Honestly, when you first pitched this to me, I was deeply skeptical.
Wait, really? Why?
Well, strawberry puree mixed into wine, it sounded like a massive headache in a glass, to be honest. But the texture is incredible. It's sweet, it's a little tart, and it completely masks the sheer volume of alcohol actually in here.
Right. Babes, this is given forbidden but fabulous. It's like we're back to being experimental drink people again. Do you remember our whole mixology phase last summer?
Oh my gosh.
We were buying all those weird, obscure bitters and, small batch syrups, thinking we were going to open a literal speakeasy in the living room.
I vividly remember we had that one disastrous week where every single drink we made tasted like smoked cedar and profound regret.
It tasted like a campfire. It was awful.
It really was, but this feels like something we shouldn't be enjoying this much, especially while watching a show that's intensely dark and, psychologically heavy.
It's the perfect contrast, though. Soft luxury beverages for hard dystopian viewing. That is my personal brand.
It's highly necessary coping strategy.
Cough luxury is literally the only mechanism I have for coping with this show. But speaking of last summer, it actually just hit me today. This is our first full summer doing this together with the Snark squad.
Wait, really? Has been a years?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We started sitting down and recording our chaotic thoughts mid-last year.
Yeah.
And the fact that we are sitting here right now sipping spiked strawberry wine, talking about the most unhinged television on earth, it just makes me want to spiral for a second.
I love a good spiral. Let's go.
In 10 years, are we still here? Still doing this? Still shading reality TV, babes?
10 years. Wow. Okay, let's unpack the trajectory of that. Will the medium even exist in the same way? Will we just be beaming our snarky, analytical hot takes directly into people's neural chips?
God, I hope so. I want my specific, unfiltered thoughts on Commander Weston directly uploaded into the collective consciousness. I deserve that.
You really do, via localized Wi-Fi.
But seriously.
Yeah.
Do you think we will evolve past this? Or are we just going to be sitting on a couch doing this exact same chaotic breakdown in a decade?
I think the technology might change, obviously. But the core of what we do, analyzing human behavior, calling out toxic red flags, and absolutely tearing apart manipulative power dynamics, that is eternal.
It is eternal.
We are never growing out of reality TV or, well, in this case, prestige dystopian TV that structurally acts like reality TV. It's just too deeply embedded in our DNA to observe human messiness and try to make sense of it.
Absolutely not. We are lifers. Babes, I hope we're rich and still messy. I want to be having this exact conversation from a sweeping villa in Italy, still absolutely losing my mind over a fictional teenager's terrible, impulsive life decisions.
I fully support that vision for us. I just hope we've upgraded the snacks by then, at minimum.
Oh, wait.
Which, by the way, brings me to a very tragic realization I had just before we sat down today.
Oh, no. Please don't tell me what I think you're going to tell me.
Coquito dip is officially gone. We scraped the absolute bottom of the bowl yesterday.
Babes, honestly, so good. That dip was everything. But this is an undeniable crisis. We are currently still snacking on the Biscoff cookies, which are elite, obviously, top-tier biscuit.
Oh, the
But
best.
dry Biscoffs. Without the creamy integration of the dip, it feels wrong. It feels barren.
It completely lacks structural integrity.
It does. Babes,
Yeah.
we need help. Send us your favorite dip recipes immediately. Leave them in the comments, DM us, whatever. We need them.
Please, treat this as a national emergency. We have developed a borderline obsessive reliance on dips to regulate our nervous systems.
Literally.
I was actually analyzing this the other day, the eternal sweet versus savory debate when it comes to viewing snacks. I feel like when we watch this specific show with this level of systemic trauma, we fundamentally require the sweet dips.
Yes. You totally get it.
The emotional support sugar is a physiological necessity at this point.
Right, because when I am watching Aunt Lydia meticulously orchestrate the complete ruin of young women's lives from behind a wooden desk, I cannot be eating roasted red pepper hummus. It does not work.
It's the wrong vibe entirely.
The vibes are completely opposed. I need heavily processed sugar. I need something that coats the stomach lining and actively comforts the soul, you know?
Hummus is for, like, objective prestige nature documentaries. Cookie dough dip is for emotional survival.
Exactly. And speaking of survival and staying in the absolute trenches of the game, we need to take a quick, highly necessary detour to talk about female kingpins.
That is a pivot that could give someone whiplash, but I am entirely here for it. Lead the way.
I can't stop thinking about it after watching the women in this episode pulling all the strings from the shadows. Now, let me clarify for the legal record and for everyone listening right now, we do not support crime. Okay.
We are law-abiding citizens.
We are upstanding citizens. But UT, babes, we do support strong women.
I mean, there is a deep psychological and sociological fascination with the female mob boss, the female kingpin. They so rarely get the spotlight in mainstream media, you know.
Never. It's always the guys.
Exactly. It's always the Tony Sopranos, the Walter Whites, the men who lead with brute force and overt aggression. But when a woman is successfully running a syndicate, the sheer terrifying intelligence,
the strategy,
the long-term strategy, and the absolute iron-fisted emotional control required to operate and thrive in an underworld that is entirely violently male-dominated. It's just absolutely mesmerizing to watch.
It really is. It makes me spiral into this whole structural debate. Like, are women just inherently better criminals?
Structurally and sociologically speaking, the data often points to a different methodology of crime that is incredibly effective.
Yes, because women are more organized. We are infinitely more detail-oriented. A woman running a massive illegal international crime syndicate is essentially just running an incredibly high-stakes, lethal PTA meeting.
That is terrifyingly accurate.
Right. Everything is meticulously color-coded. There are contingencies for the contingencies. The bake sale is a front for money laundering, and the spreadsheet is flawless.
And crucially, they're less likely to get caught doing something catastrophically stupid based on pure hubris.
Exactly.
Female criminals operating at that high level aren't usually doing it for the ego trip or the public glory. They're doing it to consolidate power, yes, but also for preservation.
Yeah, they're not trying to be flashy.
Right. A female kingpin isn't going to get busted because she impulsively decided to buy a neon green Lamborghini with cash she just laundered from a shell company, which is exactly how half the male cartels get taken down.
Exactly. A woman is quietly, methodically investing her illicit, blood-soaked funds in a heavily diversified mutual fund. And, like a series of tasteful, understated rental properties in the suburbs,
Yeah.
she is building generational wealth, not buying bottle service.
Well, scientifically speaking, the prefrontal cortex, the part of the human brain responsible for long-term planning, complex impulse control, and understanding the cascading consequences of your actions, it doesn't even fully develop in men until they are roughly 35 years old, sometimes later.
Babes, that explains everything.
Doesn't it?
It truly deeply does. It explains the terrible dating pool. It explains every chaotic text message I've ever received at 2 a.m. And it perfectly explains the foundational architecture of the commanders in Gilead.
It really does.
Frontal lobes missing in action. Just pure, unadulterated, unchecked impulse driving an entire nation into the ground.
Which brings us perfectly and tragically back into the absolute mess that is episode 7. We need to tear into this hour of television.
I am so ready.
The narrative mission today is incredibly clear. We are treating commitment exactly like what it is, the messiest, most toxic episode of a reality dating show, crossed with a terrifying hostage situation and a psychological thriller.
I have been vibrating since the opening scene. Let's start with the absolute biggest, most triumphant gasp of the episode, the return of the undisputed queen. Rita.
Amanda Brugel back on our screens, a complete and total revelation. Her screen presence is just unmatched.
I screamed. I literally startled my dog because I yelled at the television. We get this flashback to Toronto, picking up right after June leaves Daisy in that diner.
Right, the diner scene.
Yeah, and Daisy is just sitting there, completely hollowed out, waiting, mourning her adopted parents who just got blown up. And the waitress who has been casually refilling her coffee all night, Linda, is actually a Mayday operative.
Such a good reveal.
She smoothly takes Daisy to a safe house. The door opens. And who is standing there in the warmth? Rita.
Can we pause the plot for just 1 second to talk about Rita's post-Gilead glow-up? Because it is culturally significant.
Please. It is everything to me.
Because she is providing the ultimate blueprint for thriving after enduring unimaginable trauma. We see her in this Toronto apartment, and she has this incredibly chic, sharp bob.
The bob was everything.
She has a pet cat. She is wearing this killer, confident red lipstick, and we find out in casual conversation that she is currently enrolled in culinary school.
I know.
Let's look at the mechanics of what she's actually doing there. She went from being a Martha in the Waterford house, where food was a literal tool of her enslavement, where baking bread was a mandate executed under the constant threat of execution or mutilation.
Oh my God, that's so true.
Right. And she actively chooses to study the culinary arts. It is a profound, beautiful psychological reclamation. She's taking the exact instrument of her former subjugation and transforming it into an expression of soft luxury, artistry, and personal autonomy, while simultaneously quietly running the Canadian underground resistance.
It made me want to ugly weep into my throw pillow, like I'm in culinary school. Yeah. Good for you, Rita. Reclaim your joy.
It was a beautiful moment.
But then the warmth of the reunion fades, and the absolute bombshell drops. Daisy is sitting on the couch, and Rita looks at her and confirms something that we have all been waiting to hear the truth about. She tells Daisy flat out that her biological parents died in Gilead.
It's a massive structural deviation from the original source material, because in the books, Daisy is actually Nicole, June, and Nick's biological daughter. But here in the show's continuity, Rita says they are dead.
Okay, I have to push back on this entirely. I need your analytical brain on this. Do we actually trust Mayday in this scene?
Oh, that's interesting.
Like, do we trust Rita in this specific, highly leveraged moment? Because my immediate thought was, are they lying to a freshly orphaned, deeply traumatized teenager to radicalize her into becoming a spy?
Wow.
Because I am sitting on my couch thinking, June is the ultimate mastermind of this entire infiltration plan. Is June above lying to a grieving kid to get a perfectly aged operative inside Aunt Lydia's school?
It's a brilliant, highly cynical question, and it forces us to look closely at the strategic mechanics and the immense psychological cost of the resistance.
Exactly.
Mayday is functioning essentially like an intelligence agency, fighting a deeply entrenched, heavily militarized fascist state. The original safe plan was extraction, right? Getting Daisy out to Colombia, using the escape funds her adoptive parents left for her.
Right.
But Daisy is volatile. She's angry. She wants immediate revenge. And Rita, despite her maternal instincts, recognizes a tactical opportunity. June's broader infiltration plan fundamentally requires a highly specific asset, an adolescent girl who can pass as a Pearl Girl recruit.
But she's a minor. They even say the quiet part out loud in the diner. We've done this before, but not with a minor.
Exactly. And this is where the strategy becomes ruthless. In conventional intelligence operations, recruiting a minor is considered an extreme liability because they lack the emotional regulation and the developed prefrontal cortex required to maintain deep cover under interrogation.
Going back to the frontal lobes.
Exactly. But in a totalitarian system like Gilead, a system that inherently infantilizes its female population, a teenager is the perfect Trojan horse. Daisy's lack of development, her impulsivity, her genuine adolescent naivety, that is exactly what makes her believable to the Pearl Girls.
That makes so much sense.
Rita is reluctant, yes, but she gives Daisy that brutal, necessary reality check. When Daisy starts getting a little too cocky, scoffing at the girls inside Gilead, Rita sharply shuts her down.
Oh, she humbled her real quick.
She tells Daisy that if she goes in there thinking she's somehow intellectually superior to those girls, she will die. Because those girls have spent their entire lives operating in a state of hypervigilance that a kid raised in free Toronto cannot even begin to fathom.
That warning gave me absolute chills because Rita isn't theorizing. She lived it. She survived it. And it highlights just how wild and dangerous it is that they actually let this kid go through with it.
It's a massive risk.
Daisy is actively grieving, her brain is nowhere near developed, and she's basically treating this espionage mission like, this will make a really sick, edgy college application essay. Girl, you are walking willingly into the belly of the beast.
Which perfectly transitions into the actual anatomy of occult recruitment, which this episode depicted with a terrifying clinical accuracy.
Terrifying is the only word for it. So the Resistance gives Daisy this completely fabricated identity, right? A fake rap sheet for petty theft, an intentionally terrible stick-and-poke tattoo that she later has to get painfully lasered off her skin.
Which looked agonizing, by the way.
Ugh, so bad. And they just drop her on the cold streets of Toronto to play hard to get with the Pearl Girl missionaries.
And what we see the Pearl Girls execute is a textbook psychological operation. It is love bombing 101, but we need to unpack what that term actually means. Because it gets thrown around a lot on the internet as just being overly affectionate.
Yeah, people use it for everything now.
Right. But love bombing is a highly calculated mechanism of control. The Pearl Girls identify an artificial deficit. Daisy is playing the role of someone unhoused, alone, alienated, and vulnerable. Notice that they don't approach her with heavy theology or Gilead ideology first.
No, not at all.
Ideology requires cognitive processing, right? It invites debate. Instead, they bypass the brain entirely and target the nervous system. They offer pure sensory and physiological security.
The room service, the cartoons.
Precisely. They bring her into a highly controlled, curated environment, a luxury hotel room. They strip her of her dirty street clothes and provide clean, soft, white robes. They provide a hot shower.
All the comforts?
Exactly. They feed her excessive amounts of room service while literal cartoons play on the television screen. Psychologists refer to this as merely controlling the environment to control the mind. They are restricting her access to the unpredictable outside world while simultaneously flooding her sensory inputs with comfort. They are actively, intentionally trying to regress her to a childlike state of dependency.
When that Pearl Girl walked up to her on the freezing street, looked her in the eye, and used the pickup line, "Do you know that God loves you?" I physically shuddered.
It's so deeply manipulative.
My soul left my body. Because it is so terrifyingly easy to see how it works.
Yeah.
When you're freezing cold, when you're hungry, when you feel entirely abandoned by the universe, and someone offers you a warm, plush bed and endless free food, and looks at you and tells you that you are uniquely special and profoundly loved. Who wouldn't fall for that?
Exactly. It's exactly how real-world high-control groups operate. They don't recruit happy, fulfilled people. They target you at your absolute lowest psychological point.
Wow.
And the brilliance of the episode is showing that even though Daisy knows logically that it's a trap, even though she is literally a trained undercover agent wearing a wire, essentially, when the Pearl Girls form that tight, warm prayer circle around her on the hotel bed, you can see on her face that she is unexpectedly moved by it.
You really can. She looks almost comforted.
The warmth is genuinely intoxicating, even when you know it's poison.
It's the ultimate metaphor for toxic dating. When you meet someone who is an absolute, undeniable walking red flag, but they love bomb you with intense attention and expensive gifts, and they text you good morning every single day, you willingly ignore the red flags.
You do. You rationalize it.
Because the warmth of being chosen feels so incredibly good in the moment. You let yourself be lulled to sleep, and then suddenly you wake up, you're at the militarized border of Gilead, surrounded by men with assault rifles, and the loving facade drops instantly into rigid control.
Which brings us perfectly and tragically to the interior of Gilead, and what I can only describe as the most horrifying matchmaking process ever committed to television.
Agnes waking up to her literal nightmare reality TV casting pool. It was like watching a horrific dystopian version of The Bachelorette.
Truly. So the girls at the school are finally getting their official marriage matches. Now, structurally, Agnes had previously pushed Aunt Lydia to include Garth Commander Chapin in the dating pool, operating under the naive assumption that because she suggested him, she would automatically be matched with him.
But Aunt Lydia does not play by your cute little rules, Agnes. Aunt Lydia is playing geopolitical mind games. Agnes gets her highly anticipated list of potential matches from Paula, her evil stepmother, and she looks at it, and it is just 3 ancient, terrifying commanders. Garth is nowhere to be found.
It's devastating.
And then we get to the school, and the ultimate gut-wrenching betrayal happens.
Becka, Agnes's best friend, reveals her own matches.
Becka gets matched with Garth, along with the absolute monstrous creep, Commander Maddox, who intentionally got her blackout drunk at the prom, and some random, likely doomed guy from the colonies.
Just a terrible lineup.
Agnes is sitting there at her desk, forced to listen to her deeply depressed best friend list off the absolute love of Agnes's life as a potential husband. Agnes literally begs Becka, with tears in her eyes, not to marry him. And Becka is so entirely broken by the system, she just looks at her and says, I want to jump off a cliff.
Because all of her choices are garbage. She doesn't even want Garth.
She just wants out.
What's deeply fascinating here is the underlying strategy behind Aunt Lydia's choices. Let's analyze this through the sociological framework of patriarchal bargaining.
Okay, yes, let's get into this.
This is the concept where women in deeply oppressive patriarchal societies accept and manipulate the rigid rules of the system in order to maximize their own personal security within it. At first glance, Lydia leaving Agnes with 3 terrible options and giving Garth to Becka looks like a petty betrayal.
That's exactly what I thought it was, just spite.
But if you look at the board, Aunt Lydia is playing a highly advanced defensive game of chess. She didn't give Garth to Agnes. She gave Garth to Becka specifically to act as a human shield.
I need you to break the math of this down for me because I was just blindingly angry on Agnes's behalf.
Okay, think about the systemic vulnerability of Becca's position. Becka completely disgraced herself at the societal ball. She got publicly drunk, she made a scene. In Gilead's rigid hierarchy, she is damaged goods. The established, powerful older commanders do not want a messy, non-compliant bride. The only powerful man who actively wants her is Commander Maddox, the predator who intentionally got her drunk to isolate her in the first place.
Ugh, he's so gross.
If Aunt Lydia doesn't provide a highly viable, socially acceptable alternative match on that list, Becka is going to be forced to marry her abuser. Or she will be classified as unmatchable and sent to the colonies to die of radiation poisoning.
Oh my God.
So Lydia throws Garth onto Becca's list. Garth is a young, newly minted commander. He doesn't have the political seniority to object to marrying a girl who made a scene at the ball. Lydia is using Garth's lower status to physically protect Becka from Maddox.
Oh my God. That is a brutal, cold, calculated strategy. It makes total undeniable sense when you map it out like that, but it is so deeply emotionally cruel to Agnes, who is just a teenager in love.
It is the reality of their world. Emotions do not matter.
And the men Agnes is left with. We have to talk about our options. Specifically, we have to talk about Commander Weston.
Commander Weston, the newly appointed head of the Eyes.
The ultimate, walking, breathing red flag. I genuinely need to take a long sip of my strawberry wine before we even discuss this man, because he is the most toxic, terrifying entity on television right now.
He truly is the distillation of every dark societal impulse. The dossier Daisy reads on him before infiltrating Gilead reveals his background. Before the fall of America, he was a wealthy crypto bro.
Which, immediately, straight to jail, do not pass a go.
It makes complete sociological sense when you examine that specific ideological pipeline.
Oh, absolutely.
The hyper-libertarian crypto bro mindset is so often rooted in a deep desire for the absolute decentralization of established authority. But paradoxically, it's driven by a massive ego that believes it should be the ultimate unchecked authority in its own sphere.
Exactly. Rules for thee, not for me.
Precisely. When the democratic structures collapsed, men like Weston didn't want freedom for everyone. They wanted a power vacuum so they could install their own tyrannical, unassailable systems. But it gets so much worse. His dossier also reveals a documented history of severe domestic violence. He had multiple restraining orders filed against him before Gilead even existed.
So he comes to the Mackenzie house for the formal courtship interview, and we get this chilling, deeply disgusting quote. Agnes is desperately trying to sabotage the date, so she intentionally brings up his previous wife, who famously died in childbirth.
Which is a huge faux pas in their society.
Right. She expects him to be sad or offended, and Weston just coldly looks at her and says, "It was the worst day of my life, the day I lost my child."
Notice exactly what is missing from that sentence.
He didn't even mention the wife, the human woman who physically died. He literally only cares about the biological product. Women are completely 100% expendable incubators to him. They aren't even people with inner lives.
They are commodities.
They are just fleshy vessels that occasionally break. And he only mourns the cargo.
It is deeply, profoundly disturbing. And what makes it exponentially worse is how his psychology reacts to Agnes's attempt at rebellion. She thought bringing up his dead wife would scare him off, or at least disgust him enough to reject her.
Which was a smart play, honestly.
Right. And he does stand up and leave abruptly. But later, we find out from Paula that he still wants to marry her. He actually moved her to the top of his list. Why?
Because of the most horrifying line of dialogue I have heard all year. It's no fun breaking a horse that's already docile.
Absolutely chilling.
I lost my mind. I was pacing my living room. The sheer dystopian horror of a grown man with infinite state power who looks at a terrified teenage girl, sees that she has a tiny, desperate spark of defiance left in her, and thinks, oh, good, a challenge. I get to slowly crush that spark until there is nothing left.
It is the most horrifying display of predatory dominance. And it maps perfectly onto the architecture of a secret police state. The mechanics of interpersonal domestic abuse isolation, the monopolization of perception, induced stability, and the constant threat of disproportionate violence are the exact same macro mechanics used by authoritarian regimes to control a massive populace.
That is so dark, but so true.
Weston, as the head of the Eyes, is simply applying his interpersonal pathology on a national scale. And what makes his pursuit of Agnes possible is that he is actively enabled by Paula. We really need to unpack Paula's role in this.
The evil therapist stepmother. The eagle-eyed fans online figured this out weeks ago. They noticed the subtle dialogue clues that Paula was a licensed therapist before Gilead took over.
Which adds such a dark, insidious layer to her character. She isn't just a strict believer, she's actively using her deep clinical knowledge of human psychology, of emotional manipulation, to systematically sell her own stepdaughter to a man she knows is a violent abuser.
Yeah.
Why? Because Weston is incredibly powerful, and it elevates Paula's own precarious social status to have her daughter marry the head of the secret police.
I have to overshare for a second because this dynamic triggered me on a deeply personal level. This reminds me of every toxic person I've ever encountered who uses weaponized therapy speak to gaslight the people around them.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean.
You know exactly the type of people I'm talking about. They go to therapy, they learn all the clinical buzzwords, boundaries, narcissism, gaslighting, emotional labor, toxic traits, and then they turn around and weaponize those exact clinical words to abuse and manipulate their friends and partners, all while sounding perfectly calm and reasonable.
Yes. They use the language of healing as a weapon.
That is Paula. She is using her psychological training not to heal, not to guide Agnes toward autonomy, but to enforce subjugation. She creates a closed psychological loop where Agnes cannot even argue back because Paula preemptively pathologizes Agnes's completely rational fear of Weston.
Making her feel crazy.
Exactly. Making Agnes feel like her terror is actually just a personal failing or a symptom of childish rebellion. Paula knows exactly what Weston is, and she is serving Agnes up on a silver platter to secure her own comfort.
It's the ultimate betrayal of her former profession. She took the Hippocratic oath of mental health and inverted it. And because Agnes is trapped in a house with a psychological warden who invalidates her reality at every turn, it forces Agnes to seek comfort and grounding wherever she can find it.
It totally isolates her.
Which leads us to what you've been perfectly calling her Little Mermaid era.
Yes. The collection.
Okay.
Agnes secretly invites Daisy into her bedroom, and she cautiously pulls out this hidden stash of absolute trash she's found from the outside world.
Yeah.
She's got a pair of dice, she's got some old plastic pens, and she has a literal glass crack pipe with a tiny fake fabric rose shoved inside of it.
Look at this stuff. Isn't it neat?
Exactly. Collecting who's its and what's its galore.
Right.
But it's so profoundly heartbreaking because she has absolutely no context for what any of these items actually are.
None at all.
She shows them to Daisy with such pride. And Daisy, who grew up in Toronto and knows exactly what a crack pipe is, chooses to lie to her. She lies to protect Agnes's innocence, telling her it's just a pretty vase.
Which is a classic, catastrophic mistake of communication. Daisy thinks she's doing a noble thing by shielding Agnes from the ugly, gritty reality of the world before Gilead. But Agnes isn't stupid.
No, she's really smart.
She may be sheltered, but she is highly observant. She knows immediately when she's being patronized. It completely backfires and creates a massive rift of trust between them. Agnes feels diminished, treated like a foolish child who isn't trusted with the truth of her own artifacts.
And feeling patronized pushes Agnes to act out even more intensely. Which brings us to the most visceral, unhinged moment of the episode. The cigarette butt.
A truly masterful, unsettling scene of television.
Agnes runs outside after that disastrous, terrifying meeting with Weston, and she catches Garth secretly smoking in the garden. He finishes, drops the cigarette butt on the ground, and crushes it with his boot. After he leaves, she creeps over, picks it up, puts it in her pocket, and later, in the privacy of her room, she literally puts this dirty, ground-in piece of trash to her own lips just to physically feel something that he touched.
We have to look at the mechanism behind this behavior. Gilead operates on a policy of profound sensory and emotional deprivation.
Everything is so sterile.
It is a sterile, highly regulated environment designed specifically to numb the inhabitants into compliance. Agnes is experiencing what psychologists refer to as sensory starvation. When a human being is fundamentally starved of authentic emotional connection, romantic touch, and tactile freedom, they will hyperfixate on the smallest, most mundane artifact of rebellion.
Wow.
That dirty cigarette butt isn't just a piece of trash to her, it's a physical talisman. It's tangible proof that a messy, passionate world exists outside of Aunt Lydia's sterile, suffocating rules.
Putting a dirty, crushed cigarette in your mouth is peak, unhinged teenage delusion. And honestly, as someone who survived my teenage years, we have to respect the sheer drama of it.
I mean, we've all been there to some degree.
Have you ever had a crush so all-consuming and desperate that you saved a movie ticket stub for 3 years or kept a paper napkin they sneezed on? It is gross, it is intense, and the worst part is Garth catches her doing it. He walks back in and sees her with it.
And how does he respond to catching her in this deeply compromising, bizarre act? He looks at her and says, "You have a personality."
In the rigid conformity of Gilead, telling a woman she has a personality is the equivalent of writing an epic romantic sonnet. It's the absolute highest compliment you can bestow. It means, I see you as an individual.
It's everything she wanted to hear.
But the romance of that moment is so incredibly short-lived because the brutal reality of the surveillance state comes crashing down through the doors.
The eyes violently raid the school. Commander Weston is personally leading the operation, acting on fresh intelligence gathered from the failed Boston invasion that explicitly states there is a Mayday spy hiding among the new Pearl girls.
And Daisy is immediately pulled into a dark room for interrogation.
Weston is sitting across from her, methodically reading through her fabricated Toronto rap sheet, probing for any tiny crack in her psychological facade. Daisy manages to hold it together using sheer, desperate bravado, spinning this elaborate story about running away with a toxic boyfriend.
She was so good in that scene.
It's a masterful performance under pressure, but the tension for the audience is absolutely unbearable because we know that earlier that night, Daisy made a massive, potentially fatal mistake.
The contraband radio. She fell asleep listening to the pirate broadcasts on Radio Free Boston, and when she jolted awake to the sounds of the raid, she panicked. In a moment of pure, blind terror, she shoved the illegal radio into Talia's bed instead of her own.
Talia, her completely innocent bunkmate, a girl who has fully bought into the system.
Vidala lines all the terrified girls up on their knees in the hallway. They search the beds, they find the radio, and the eyes drag Talia away. She is kicking, screaming, crying for her mother. The camera pans, and another Pearl girl is so paralyzed by fear, she literally wets herself on the floor. It is pure, unfiltered state terror.
This sequence forces us to examine the concept of the panopticon.
Wait, what is that?
It's a theory of surveillance conceptualized by Jeremy Bentham and expanded by Michel Foucault. The terrifying genius of the panopticon isn't that you are actually being watched at every single second, it's that you might be watched at any given moment, and the punishment is so severe that you internalize the surveillance.
Oh, so you police yourself.
You become your own jailer. And under the crushing pressure of that systemic terror, human solidarity completely collapses. Daisy's basic survival instinct violently overrides her moral training. She survived the raid, yes, but she did it at the direct, immediate expense of an innocent girl's life.
It's so sad.
Talia is either going to be publicly executed or sent to the colonies to die a slow, agonizing death from toxic exposure, entirely because of Daisy's panic.
The crushing weight of that guilt has to be unimaginable for a teenager. The episode ends with this haunting shot of Daisy lying in bed, in the pitch dark, wide awake, frantic, and she is furiously praying. She is whispering the required Gilead prayer over and over to herself.
Which leaves us with a deeply unsettling psychological question.
Which is
she praying because the guilt is eating her alive and she needs an outlet? Or is something far more insidious? Is the systematic cult conditioning of Gilead, the constant low-level hum of fear, the sheer exhaustion of trying to survive, actually starting to rewire her brain?
Oh my God.
When you stare death in the face like she just did, do you eventually start turning to the very authoritarian system that is actively oppressing you simply because conforming is the only way to feel a fleeting sense of safety?
That thought is making me physically spiral. It's so incredibly dark. Looking at this entire chessboard we've just laid out, if we had to ruthlessly rank who is actually holding the real power in this episode, the hierarchy is fascinating. Let's do segment 1, power player ranking.
Okay, let's rank them based on intelligence, control, and influence.
Who is at the top?
The unseen architect is always the most powerful entity in the room. Unquestionably, Aunt Lydia holds the absolute top position.
Hands down.
She barely had to lift a finger or raise her voice this entire episode, but her quiet presence dictated every single outcome, matching Becka with Garth to shield her from Maddox, while simultaneously leaving Agnes entirely vulnerable to the predation of Weston. She is controlling the entire socio-economic board of this society.
Right behind her has to be Rita.
Oh, absolutely.
She is running the Canadian underground resistance, managing complex logistics, making literal life-or-death strategic decisions about sending untrained operatives into a war zone, and she's doing it all while casually securing a degree in the culinary arts. That is peak icon behavior. She is holding immense power, but she's doing it with elegance.
I completely agree. The third node of power is undeniably Commander Weston. The terrifying, quiet control he exerts over every space he enters. He is the head of the eyes, he dictates the violent interrogations, and his chilling confidence when dealing with Agnes, that dark amusement at her defiance, shows a man who is entirely, completely secure in his absolute authority.
It's disgusting but true.
He doesn't need to yell because the entire state apparatus acts as his weapon.
And rounding out the top tier is Paula, using her advanced clinical therapist skills for absolute unfiltered evil. She's meticulously orchestrating her family's social and political climb over the broken, terrified body of her own stepdaughter, and doing it with a smile.
Noticeably absent from this ranking of power is our supposed protagonist, Daisy.
Okay, I want to argue that Daisy deserves some respect here.
Really?
Yes. She survived a one-on-one, high-stakes psychological interrogation with the head of the secret police. She maintained her cover story while a man who breaks people for a living stared her down.
I have to push back on that assessment entirely. We are talking about power and control. Planting the radio on Talia was an act of incredibly sloppy panic.
Well, true.
Falling asleep with an illegal broadcast playing out in the open in a heavily monitored dormitory was careless to the point of absurdity. She survived the night, yes, but that was sloppy reactive survival, not mastermind control. She is constantly reacting to the environment. She isn't directing it.
Okay, that is a very fair point. But holding power in a specific, isolated moment and surviving the long, grueling game of this dystopian reality show are two entirely different skill sets. Which brings us to segment 2, who would survive the long game?
I love this question.
Who actually has the emotional and psychological stamina for this? Who is built for long-term strategy? And who is inevitably going to crack under the relentless pressure?
Let's analyze Daisy first in that context. On paper, she is built for strategy. She has the Mayday backing, she has the fake identity, she understands the mission, but we are currently witnessing the real-time signs of her psychological armor cracking.
The panic attack.
The hyperventilating panic attack in the empty classroom immediately after surviving the interrogation, the frantic, desperate praying in bed. The trauma of causing Talia's arrest is rapidly eroding her cognitive resilience.
And what about Agnes?
Yeah.
Because I feel like I'm watching a slow-motion car crash with her.
Agnes is also cracking under the pressure, but in a fundamentally different, arguably more dangerous way. Her acts of rebellion are purely emotional, entirely impulsive, and lack any strategic foresight.
Stealing the cigarette butt. Dropping the snarky, confrontational comment to Weston about his dead wife during a formal interview.
Exactly. It's classic teenage defiance, which is a completely natural developmental stage. But in the lethal environment of Gilead, it puts a massive glowing target directly on her back. She is actively drawing attention to her non-compliance in a system where absolute invisibility is the only guaranteed mechanism of survival.
So if the trained spy is breaking, and the rebellious teenager is painting a target on her back, who actually survives the long game?
Ironically enough, Becka.
Wait, Becka. The girl who explicitly stated she wants to jump off a cliff because she hates her life so much.
Yes, because her profound clinical depression and her total exhausted compliance make her practically invisible to the system's wrath. She isn't fighting back like Agnes, drawing the ire of men like Weston. She isn't playing a highly dangerous, complex espionage game like Daisy, risking execution by the eyes.
She's there.
She is simply enduring. And history shows us that in a totalitarian regime, the citizen who endures quietly, who makes himself small and unremarkable, often outlasts the brave ones who fight loudly. It's a deeply tragic paradox of survival.
Wow. That is incredibly dark, but logically undeniable. And a huge part of that endurance, of staying invisible, comes down to information control. Which brings us to segment 3, secret keeper or snitch.
In a house literally built on surveillance, where the walls have ears and the state has eyes, who is actually capable of holding a secret and who is destined to spill it and bring the whole house down.
That brings up a fascinating dynamic of forced complicity. Talia, for instance, is a forced snitch.
Oh, absolutely.
She took the ultimate fall for a secret she didn't even know she was keeping. She was an entirely unwitting participant in Daisy's sloppy espionage, and she paid the price for a secret she couldn't even leverage.
Meanwhile, Daisy is barely a functioning secret keeper. Like you said, she's a profoundly messy double agent. She almost got the entire multi-year Mayday operation blown to pieces because she wanted to listen to Radio Free Boston and decided to take a nap instead of being vigilant.
Babes, you are an undercover operative behind enemy lines. Drink some espresso and stay awake.
And then, of course, there's Agnes.
Agnes is the absolute ultimate snitch on herself.
It is hilariously, tragically true. Let's review the facts. Keeping a hidden stash of highly contraband pens, illegal dice, and a dirty cigarette tucked away in a house run by Paula. A woman who is a highly trained psychologist, constantly monitoring behavior, and completely devoid of human empathy.
It's so reckless.
That is practically begging to be caught. It's an act of subconscious self-sabotage at its finest. She wants to be seen rebelling, even if it kills her.
She is leaving a literal, physical breadcrumb trail, leading directly to her own execution, which perfectly tees up Segment 4, main character versus mastermind.
The ultimate distinction.
It really highlights the fundamental difference between the people giving us the messy emotional storyline, the main characters, and the producers orchestrating the chaos behind the scenes.
It's a crucial distinction when analyzing how power flows in this narrative. The main characters of this story are Agnes and Daisy. They are the ones viscerally experiencing the plot. They are making impulsive emotional decisions, crying in locked bathrooms, crushing on boys, making devastating mistakes, and surviving solely by the skin of their teeth.
And we, as the audience, are deeply emotionally invested in their immediate survival.
But they aren't running the show, not even close. The true masterminds are June, who we don't even see on screen this episode, but who methodically set this entire infiltration up years ago. Rita, who is calmly executing the complex logistics from a safe distance, and Aunt Lydia, who is actively pulling the strings of the entire societal dating pool from her office.
Exactly. The masterminds are operating on a macro level, treating the main characters like disposable, emotional chess pieces to achieve a larger systemic victory.
And honestly, it makes perfect sense because reality TV and oppressive regimes needed the messy, highly emotional main characters to constantly distract from the producers who are quietly making and changing the rules.
You say it again.
If everyone in Gilead was a cold, calculating mastermind, the system would gridlock. We absolutely need Agnes putting a dirty cigarette in her mouth or Daisy panicking with the radio so that we and the eyes don't look too closely at Aunt Lydia quietly manipulating the entire socioeconomic structure of the state of Maryland right under the commander's noses.
It's the perfect engineered distraction. Keep the populace focused on interpersonal drama so they don't notice the shifting architecture of their own cage.
It really is brilliant and terrifying.
It's so terrifying. Okay, I think my blood pressure is finally stabilized, so we have to wrap this up. Thank you so much for hanging out with us, for pouring the strawberry wine, and for spiraling deeply into the dark, analytical abyss of Gilead dating dynamics.
It has been quite the journey today, but before we sign off, I want to leave you with a final lingering thought.
Oh, I'm ready.
If we connect all of this back to Daisy's final voiceover at the very end of the episode, she notes, almost nostalgically, that Gilead paints over the old pre-war billboards with thick black paint, making them look like giant sensor bars suspended across the sky.
Yeah, she mentions that she actually misses looking at the advertisements.
Think deeply about the psychological implication of that specific detail. Is the ultimate, most devastating weapon of a totalitarian regime not just banning the act of reading or violently banning free speech, but methodically banning the very permission to want something?
Wow.
When you can't even look at an advertisement, when there is absolutely no visual representation of desire or aspiration allowed in your entire physical environment, how do you even remember how to desire a better life? They aren't just erasing words with that black paint. They are actively trying to erase the fundamental human capacity for longing.
That thought is genuinely going to keep me staring at the ceiling tonight. Erasing the capacity to want. I am going to need another full glass of wine just to process the weight of that.
Cheers to that.
Do not forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share this with a messy friend who desperately needs to hear about Commander Weston's glaring red flags before they go on their next hinge date.
We appreciate you spending this time with us.
Stay powerful, stay unhinged, and we will see you on the Snark side.